John, you've been playing from a very early age. You performed a piano recital when you were just 9. When was it you first discovered you had a talent?
The golden question. I can't remember that far back, but my parents told me I was about 3.5 or 4 when I was picking out tunes on a neighbour's piano. We didn't have a piano at home, which was in Leyton. My parents couldn't afford one, and they couldn't have one for some years. Then they eventually got a reconditioned one. But the neighbour's piano was like a magnet to me. You know, I was always there teaching myself to play, very badly, I'm sure. But the incredible keenness was there from a very early age, apparently. And I was writing music. It must have been pretty awful, but I was really obsessed about it. But I was also very keen on painting and drawing. My father was a very good amateur cartoonist, and I believe I won the Daily Mirror Prize for painting when I was about 7 or 8, something like that. But then music took over in a very decisive way after that, and it's always been the case ever since. You know, it's always been my main sort of partner, if you like.
Now, you said you come from Leyton. You was born in Leyton and attended Leyton Boys' School. What memories do you have growing up in Waltham Forest?
Thoroughly enjoyable. Down-to-earth people, very natural, very sincere people, and they still are. And I come and see my friends as often as I can. Every year we have a little reunion of the old Leyton Boys' High School. And, of course, we're all now about 60 years old. It's rather amusing. Last year I tried to find them on the table in the restaurant, and of course I saw this table full of bald heads, and yet it seems like yesterday we were at the same school together.
Now, you have been associated with Beethoven a lot in recent years. What inspiration do you get from that composer?
I think of all the composers, he was the greatest, as far as I'm concerned, because it was completely straight, sincere. He goes for the jugular. There's no time for artificiality or anything insincere, and he shows life and more. You know, whereas many great musical geniuses they paint the beautiful picture of the mountain, which is our mystery, if you like. But with Beethoven, he glimpses the other side. He shows us the other side, which I think is so exciting.
And you're a source of hope for many of our listeners, I believe, because you overcame a terrible tragedy a few years ago when you was attacked by muggers who wounded your fingers, and you thought you'd never be able to play again. How did that feel at the time?
Well, I must say the media did overreact. It was the silly season, and I just played to the Queen Mum, and therefore, of course, it was a sort of a romantic story. Certainly I was asked for my wallet by 2 cowards, and when I told them to get lost, there was a struggle. I was carrying heavy suitcases, and they made off with one and lashed out with their machetes, and they caused a certain degree of damage to the hands, but in fact they soon healed, and I was very, very lucky. It could have been a lot worse, but it shows you, in a sense, the spiritual collapse of many of our big centres in this country.
So if we have any listeners in the hospital who are in there through an injury or through an accident or something to themselves that they think may affect their hobby, they should keep up hope.
Absolutely. I'm a tremendous believer in mind over matter. I think the mind has unlimited powers once you really sort of train how to receive powers from outside yourself, because that's what I feel also guides me through. People often think that all that you see is all there is, but I mean they never think about the invisible world, the invisible forces. Look at the power of radio, television, all these are invisible forces. Inspiration is invisible. And you take the word apart, in spirit, it's the same thing. So people should do well to imagine and then to realise for sure that there are so many things we know nothing about which are working to give us great advantage. Great forces of good are at work. Because you can't see them, so what? Can you see music? Another example.
Now, you've played in over 50 countries, countless orchestras and conductors, including Simon Rattle and Sir Adrian Boult. What has been the most memorable performance you've given? That's
a very difficult one to answer. There have been a few I've been very proud of, and I think I've approached perfection. But some of the exciting times were, of course, easy to remember. I mean, I remember when I won the first prize in the Tchaikovsky competition in Moscow back in 1970. That was an exciting time, and those concerts were enjoyable. Because then it was, that year, Lenin's centenary, and of course everyone thought that the Soviet Union would make sure that they won outright. But in fact, they treated me so well, and that's a happy example of some concerts I gave.
And how important are the audience in a concert?
Very. They're nearly always on your side. Well, in fact, they are always on your side. And when you come out, you realise you're actually helped a lot by their enthusiasm and by their encouragement. And the fact that they're there's an extra dimension they form. You know, you may not see it, but it's there, and you can sense it very strongly. That's why I think giving a concert is so far preferable to making a recording, because you get that extra dimension, and it's a one-time only chance. In a recording studio, you can patch things up. If there's a noise, you can get rid of it and do it again. In a concert, it's It's all or nothing, and that's what I like. That's the challenge of the public concert.
Recently I heard that you gave a concert and the orchestra failed to turn up. I don't know if they were stuck in some bad weather or something, and you had to perform the first half unaccompanied. What happened there?
Well, this was a quite amusing story looking back. I was with the Bournemouth Symphony, I think it was in February, and there was a bit of snow, but you know what happens in this country, you get a tiny bit of snow and everything stops. We got to Bournemouth in good time for the concert, fine. It took us nearly 4 hours to do less than 1 mile, trapped in this car. And of course the conductor and I were in this car ready for the concert, dressed up, tails, shiny shoes. We abandoned the car in the end and walked the last 1.5 miles to the hall, by which time the concert should have started. Thank goodness for mobile phones in this case. It was just put off, and then we realised the orchestra was stuck far more than we were. So in fact the orchestra had no chance of getting there on time. So they said, can you play for us? Can you give us a recital? Well, fine, that's part of my job, but I hadn't given a recital for some weeks, and there was nothing really ready. But again, mind over matter. It was an interesting challenge, and rather like a pilot, you know. People complain about what pilots earn. Fine, they do earn a lot just for sitting there, but if something goes wrong, then they earn their money, and that's what I think I did that night. You know, I'd never seen the piano before, and I went on to play something from the back of my mind, and actually as a result of that, because of the adrenaline or whatever, I was very pleased with the result. The orchestra actually struggled in about 1.5 hours later and played the second half, but it's one of those amusing stories looking back. And there are plenty of amusing stories. People think it's a serious life, but there are many funny things that happen. I've known pianos go through the floor during concerts, things like that, you know. People die on you quite regularly or pass out, especially in slow movements, you know, when they have to keep quiet. There are certain pieces which are famous for that, and you just are quite lucky when you realise you've got through them without any more fatalities.
What are your plans for the future?
To continue to expand with regard to my repertoire, experience of life, meeting of people, just experiencing life to the full. You know, I think every experience helps you, whether it's good or bad. There's still so much to learn. So it's just the question of filling in the gaps, experiencing more, and aiming even higher, making sure you get as near perfection as you can, because there's no buzz to equal that of having successfully overcome a challenge. You know, I think life for me is challenge, and if I've got a few days off, I get bored and I get very restless. I like the challenge of the next concert, and I don't just mean myself. I think it applies to all people. I mean, if people realise that, you know, they really are on the right lines, and if they just see that sight ahead of that mountain I described earlier, just climbing up that mountain gradually, it may even out. You may think you get to the top, and when you do it, evens out even more. But somewhere there is a vision over that mountain top, and that's what gives the buzz.
Oh, excellent. And on those wise words, we will leave it. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks for your very interesting questions. Enjoyed it.